If you want to know what the best clay is for making monsters in the world, stay tuned. Hi, I'm Ed Edmonds with Distortions Unlimited, and today we are going to be discussing one of the most important parts of making monsters, and that is the very clay that you use. Now, I've got some extremely strong opinions. I'm not going to pull any punches, so if you're, it's not PC, so if you're easily offended, turn this off now, because I am going to tell you what I think, and of course it's right. But anyway, does anybody know what WED stands for? Yes. No. No. Where are you from? I love that galaxy. We used to go there with the kids. Anybody else? Yes. No, that's right in principle, but wonderful, exciting dirt. No, that's not it, but very good. All right, well, it stands for Walter E. Disney. Now, Walter E. Disney is the guy that started Disneyland, and he developed this clay. They were doing so many sculptures for Pirates of the Caribbean that they needed something that had the speed of water-based clay, but the quality, some of the qualities of oil-based clay. And so this was developed for Disney, and it has become a standard in the industry. And so now this is the clay to use if you want to go high speed. This is the clay. Now, there is some great oil-based clays. I'm not dissing oil-based. They have their place. Some people, if you're kind of doing it, you're going to work on a monster for a couple of months or something, it's great because it doesn't dry out. It's very nice to work with, but it is hard. The way I used to do all my sculpts in oil-based clay, and the only way I could really do it well was to put the clay, cut it into strips, put it in a hot box, put it on while it's wet, not wet, but soft, and then get my large anatomy and then go in for details. Unfortunately, it would cool off fairly quickly, so you were kind of stuck if you couldn't finish your large anatomy quickly. And so it took a fluid, creative experience. It turns it into a mechanical and joyless process. So in addition to my diatribe on why we love WED clay, I'm going to show you some of the reasons we love it, how you can carve in the details, soften them with a sponge. You can move the clay around because surfaces, even though they're, they look smooth, they're really not quite a lot of times. They go in and out of things, and you can create pores and things with sponges, and then we're going to show you how to use a hair dryer or a fan to accelerate stiffening the clay up. That's the thing I love about WED clay. You're dealing with soft, large anatomy until you get it the way you want. Then you can just, as you're working, it dries, you can put a fan on it to move it along so it gets stiffer and stiffer, and you go in for finer and finer details. And some of the greatest sculpting artists in the world have used this stuff, like Henry Alvarez, who's no longer with us, a wonderful, wonderful guy. I believe he worked almost exclusively in WED clay, and his stuff was perfect. I mean, his Clint Eastwood looked like a photograph. I mean, it was like, and he did lots of movie work and stuff. So it is a wonderful medium at wherever you're at in your abilities. And we're going to show you some of the initial steps, and then show you what we ended up with, but to show you how we use WED clay to make magic here at Distortions. Here we go. I've gone over some of these tools in the past. I'm going to go over them again, but in more detail. You know, we feel like with this series, the Monster Lab series, we don't want to put up a lot of obstacles. Like, you got to have this, you got to have that. but I am going to show you some tools that I really love, and this is one of them. It's not necessary. It's you can use a wire, you can cut the clay with knives. This is a head bust I made forever ago. It's just plaster, but you can buy nice fiberglass ones and whatever you want. But I start by cutting about, over the bust. I like to go about a ½ an inch bigger than the bust. Now this leaves you room to sculpt in and for your details, but it also allows, latex shrinks. So every generation you're going to lose about 3.5%, and it's more than it sounds like. That's a fair amount, especially when you're trying to fit a size of a head. And then you've got to allow for the thickness of the rubber itself, depending on how thick it is. It might be an 1/8 inch thick or something. So this is just me. This is not necessarily the only way these things get done. Also, I'm going to spray this real quick. It helps to create a vacuum. So you get, don't soak it, just enough to wet it so that it makes kind of a suction vacuum. And I usually put it on the head just above the eyes, because you got to save the eye area. Now there's another little trick that I use, and again, it's not necessarily the truth for all sculptors. That's not that. You're getting my opinion, take it or leave it. But for whatever reason, it seems like the thing shrinks up like this. So I get really thin on top so that it rests right in your head, and all that shrink just kind of, and so it seems to work. If I put a full ½ inch up here, it does this. I'm not quite sure the mechanics of why that works, but anyway, I'll dodge the eyes and keep them so I know right where they are. That is more important than the ventilation, because you can have your breathing holes in a lot of places, as long as it's near your mouth. Eyes, no, they got to be on target. Okay, so here's this little step. So I've got no clay up here, so I'm going to cut a thinner piece of clay and put it around the crown up here. So then we'll transition to the thin by just hammering this down. Now, I don't know if anybody else does this. The thing is, we've always been kind of isolated here in Colorado from a lot of the ways people do things in Hollywood. I've learned some of the stuff, of course, but stuff like this doesn't get brought up at parties and stuff. You're talking about some movie or something, you just don't even think about it. Now, I haven't got quite enough to cover the top, so I'm going to hammer this on and try to get it pretty darn thin. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We're not building bridges here, but it just needs to be these little techniques for me. And I've done so many masks, I don't know, an insane amount over the years. That they were just things that I learned that worked and sped the process up. Now, so one of the first tools when you're doing smoothing in large anatomy is a little kidney brush, and it's got teeth around the edge, little teeth. And so you can go and smooth it. And I want to say this about large anatomy. Large anatomy is so important that you get it right before you move on. And when you're sculpting, especially when you're new to sculpting, you want to get into the details and you want it to start looking like something. And so you're in a hurry. And so you just, I want to get some wrinkles on here. I want to get those eyes in. Problem is, if you can't be patient and make sure your large anatomy is right, and I'm talking cheekbones, the shape, the jawline, all that stuff. If you don't get that done first, before you go into small detail, one of two things is going to happen to you. One, you're going to not be willing to go back and destroy all that detail work you did, and so you're going to have a weird looking monster. Or it's even more important when it's a human-based monster, because there's things that your eye and brain know. You might look at it, it's like, something's wrong with that. I don't know what. And that's where it can get a little time-consuming. I would highly recommend getting some anatomy books, or just make like a makeup morgue where you've got pictures of faces of different people, different expressions, different ages, very important, and reference that as you're doing your large anatomy. The other problem that will happen if you choose to fix it is you're going to have wasted maybe hours on the sculpture that now you have to go back and erase. So one way or the other, it's not good. Either you're going to have a weird looking monster, or you're going to have to go back, obliterate all your work, and get back to your large anatomy. So I've learned it the hard way. That's how I learn all my lessons, is the hard way. I can't hardly learn it the easy way. So you may have to too, and that's fine. It's all a part of the business, and just the psychology that goes with sculpting. And it's a very, very common thing. But we want to, the whole purpose of this series is to make this knowledge accessible, not complicated. It's a lot of little steps and things, but it's actually things that you can learn and practice. And I just feel like to jump to super complicated ways of doing things, or to skip some of the details and just, don't tell you things because it's cumbersome. There's a terrible price to pay for that hopefully you can avoid and have a really good experience from the get-go. Okay, so this guy, now on the other side there's a smooth thing, so you can come back and actually use the same tool, but there's also tools that are just smooth, but this one can do it too. Just smooth it out and get your, this is basically, you're at ground zero now. You've got a form that will shrink, fit your head. It will allow room for the latex. You can sculpt in, you can add to it. This is just kind of your 3D canvas. This process that I'm doing right now is so much faster with WED clay. You can do similar things with oil base, but just the smoothing process, what I'm doing right now with a sponge and water, doesn't work. Now, some of the people will use solvent-based stuff to cut into the clay. I never like that. First of all, you got to deal with the fumes. I don't know, I think some people use rubbing alcohol. I forget all the different ones, but it's already bad enough. I know I'm picking on oil-based clay, but even when you have to do large anatomy and heat the clay and stuff, now your hands smell bad. You know, they smell chemically and stuff because there's the oils in there. And so I didn't like that either. WED clay is dirt. That's what we're dealing with. There is some things they put in it, obviously, to make it stick well and be the right consistency and not crack and dry too much. But I want to be fair right now. I'm not being very genuine if I just sing the praises of water-based clay. Let me show you one of the problems with water-based clay. Now, when you sculpt, you've got to, when you leave the sculpture, even if you think you're going out of the room just for a little bit, you might forget, go to lunch, forget it the next morning, it's like, oh no, and this can happen. This is a beheaded illusion that will never live because I started it and I did cover it and try to keep it alive, and the weeks turned into months, the months turned into years, and here's the problem. You can kind of bring WED clay back to a certain degree, but I've never tried to bring it back when it's this hard, and it's like it's gone. It's absolutely, it's gone. You can't fix that. So if that was oil-based clay, there would just be a few dents. So it's not perfect. It's just very, very close.
You look like you could use a vacation.
So there. If you want to give the video a thumbs down because I wasn't being fair and impartial, there, I tried. And I'm not impartial and I'm not fair. And if you want that, you are listening to the wrong show, because we love our WED clay. And again, this is not a sculpting tutorial. This is more about the specifics of how to work with WED clay. This isn't, here's how you sculpt a tooth and that kind of stuff. We've got lots of videos on sculpting, and we'll do more. This is how to work with WED, or how we work with WED clay. Somebody else you could watch another video and they'd have some great techniques, I'm sure. This is just what we've learned over, unfortunately, 40 years. Okay, so I'm smoothing some more. When I sat down, I realized that it was a little lopsided and stuff. So a tool that I really love for large anatomy is this is a rake. It's got rakes on one side. And so you can come in and smooth down areas and then come back and smooth that back out. And so it was just, like I said, it's not an exact science. I probably just put on the clay a little thicker or overlapped it in a few places. So this is just to kind of get the feel of the shape of the head that's going to be in this mask. So the character I'm going to do, I'm I'm more interested in showing you how WED clay can be manipulated quickly and organically. So I'm gonna do a character that has no eyeballs, and it's just a big screaming mouth. And I'm going to use this inlet here that's, between your chin and your chest, and make this deep mouth. It should be pretty creepy. All right, so I'm going to start. Now, I still, even though he doesn't have eyes, you have eyes. So I'm going to fill this in. And one thing I kind of like to do, your eyes are actually pretty close to the top of the socket. And so I'm gonna define my center, and my pupil is going to be right around there. That's where I'm going to be seeing. So as I build this clay up in here, I'll try to keep track of that. And he's going to have like sunken, like the eyeballs have been gone for a while. Maybe he never had them. We don't know. These monsters, they live some pretty hard lives. And always think about, skin wrapping around the bones. What would that look like exactly? And so I'll show some bone structure here in a minute. But I want to keep track. I'm going to have little holes in here to see out of, but I got to keep track of them. Okay, so this tool I like because it's got like a little finger here that you can get into deep places and smaller than your finger. And this has got a point. And so I'm going to give him some wrinkles that looks like he's a little upset about something. And the wrinkles are not all the same. They stop and start and things. And so I'm just basically kind of drawing the where I want the wrinkles to go. And then I'm going to enhance it. Now you can just simply cut in and then smooth out, but I like to give it a little punch where the skin is folding and bunching up, basically. So I'm just using the lines I drew as a template. Now we'll come back in and we'll strengthen these lines that I've carved in, but this is actually going to be mushed down a lot, and that's one of the tricks that I use to create a very quick, organic brought the head out and stuff, just creating interesting shapes. Now, this is something, this isn't really a sculpting demo. This is more about working with WED clay, but sometimes if you just sit and look at the sculpture and you go, I'm just satisfied, what could I do? And so I brought some interesting shapes and brought some stuff, because you always want to look at it all the way around. And so it's still in a rough form, But while the clay is still soft, I start doing stuff with water, and I'll actually mush it around, and I'll have to go back in and detail it more. But this is what I love about WED clay. You can really move it organically and so forth. Now, what's really going to be important in this video is this little sponge right here. This is a natural sponge, and when you push it into wet clay, it'll actually give you some texture, but even more important than that, it'll move the clay. You can actually like push it with a finger or something and push a hole in. I put on a couple of bumps here. I'll do some more of that to show you. And you push them down with the sponge until it looks right. You know, you can actually leave them oversized and weird looking, but this is where you can take WED and make it look amazing very, very fast. So I'm going to show you what I do anyway. Now, this is not the only way you can work with WED clay. I'm sure a lot of people take it, you know, much closer to finish and stuff, but this is how I cheat, and it works for me. So you just go in and get everything wetted down, or you can work in a small area and move to another area. Maybe that's what we'll do. And so what I'm doing is blending away all my tool marks. And a lot of this detail, you're going to have to come back in and add it back in. But what my goal here is to start getting the thing to look more organic and real. And so I'm just getting the clay, just the surface of the clay, moist. But anyway, so you get it all wet down like this, and then you come in with the sponge and you start pushing. And you can actually push directions. Like I say, you can push with your whole hand like this, or you can push with a finger and just start getting the clay to move around into a more organic look. And you got to be careful. You don't want to blast away all your work. So, you know, it's better to hit it numerous times and until it's where you want it, rather than come in and get too aggressive. Okay, so you can see the difference, how it's starting to look more natural over here. However, it's also like washed out. And so that's where you come back and say, okay, well, that looks more natural, but it's blurry. So then I'll come back with a tool and punch these lines, get that detail back in there. And of course this got washed out a little bit. And you can still kind of see where you're working, because the lines are usually still there. If you haven't pushed too hard, you're just punching them back. But even this has got to be softened. And so it's kind of a process. You keep going back again and again, but it's such a fast process that it really doesn't matter. And you kind of, when you get it where you want it, then you just, okay, I'm gonna be more careful. And then I'm gonna show you how to use the hairdryer to really go in for fine detail. Now, one thing I want to show you, just because I was doing this off camera, but folds like this, I like to take the rake and push it and to stroke it, pull it out, and it just creates these great natural looking rolls of fleshiness and fatness. I mean, you can do it. It's not just for fat. It works for skinny too, because you know there's a certain amount of sponginess to skin and what's going on underneath, and fat and muscle and so forth. So this is really nice. You can come in and beef up stuff very realistically, and I go from both sides so that so I'm doing a little more subtle wrinkle here. And think about, you know, what would be happening stress-wise as a character's making an expression. But you know, the WED clay works so wonderfully with these tools. Now, these tools certainly work on oil-based clay and clay that has oil, wax, mixture, whatever, just a firmer, non-drying material. But now, so I'll take this and I'll go back in with the brush, but now I've got a much more organic look to the clay. And I'm also, of course, rinsing away the tool marks. Again, this isn't a sculpting demo. This is a WED clay demo. Why WED? Why I like WED, and I assume other people do. I'm sure other people have different reasons. But it's starting, and like if the line is too straight, I can go in with a finger and start moving it and making it more organic, because there really isn't a lot of straight lines in nature. It's subtle, but things are a little more wavy. So I've done that. Then I'll come in like those wrinkle lines I did, and I'll just blend them away. Now there's a trick with this brush. When you get to drier stuff, like you're not wanting to beat the clay down so much, you can just do that. And now that brush is not going to eat away that line so much. But I'm not quite there yet. I'm still wanting to, because I'll come back again and I'll hit these lines as I get closer. But that's usually, I'll start getting even smaller tools and things as I dry it. And this is the other part of WED clay that I love, and that is, so this is a slightly too wet to work with. It's still very malleable and stuff, but I've kind of got my overall shapes I want. So then I come in with, well, wait, I'm going to hit this just a little more. I come in with the hairdryer, and I change the consistency of the clay to more like a harder oil-based clay. And this is where you can go in for the detail. Now, I've got some very organic looking lines, but now I've blurred them out again with the brush and stuff, but I can come in now with a smaller tool, and I can, now the clay is firm, and I can work in those details, and I'm doing little little lines. There's tools like this that you can use and kind of crisscross and beat those things down later. But for right now, this guy, he doesn't need a lot of wrinkling because he's not a super thin, dried up zombie or something like that. So this little tool, and this is a very thin little wire tool that you can come in and do some really subtle stuff with. And come in here and bring that line back in. And a lot of this has been beaten back as I've worked here. So I'll bring these lines back in. And sometimes you'll have a line that you don't like. Well, you just kind of blend it away and fix it. That's another great thing. You can, let's say I decided I'm not liking the look, I can wet it down some more and move it around. It's so wonderful. So let's see, I'm gonna hit it with just a little bit. Now this is where, because I'm getting dry, and also try to get the excess clay out, so you're just dealing with water. Get this brush dry, and now you can just kind of come in and soften, not wipe out. So now the lines are there, but they're believable. You're softening the edges so they look real, but you're not obliterating them so they're getting blurry. And this is where I love the material. It allows you so much easy creative freedom. What I like to do is take little bits of clay and stick them on, and you got to go kind of all the way around the edges so that it's well stuck on. And varying sizes, and I don't know if anybody else does this, but for me, it's like a very fast way to add organicness to your sculpture. And some of them are small, some are big. And then again, I want this kind of to be a warty character, so we'll add some that we don't smooth down so much. And this may be too subtle for the camera to really read what's going on here as far as the non smooth lines. You're breaking up the lines going from point A to point B, and you almost don't hardly notice it, except it brings the sculpture to life in a lot of ways. Okay, so now come back with the sponge. And just push on them. If you need to blend them in a little more, do that. I suppose you could do this with oil base, but it's certainly not as easy. And I'm as I'm pushing, if they make a little wrinkle, I'm blending that away so they just create this organic up and down look. And another thing you can do is go the other direction and push, use your finger to push. And this gives you this mottled skin that's great for monsters. Monsters, they don't always have great complexions. And so you gotta give them that hard living kind of look. So I hope you can see that, but it adds so much. I can't overstate it. And when you try it yourself, you'll see it probably better than it's going to show up on camera. So now he's modeled. I'm going to hit them again with the hairdryer, and this time I'm going in for the final detailing, and of course I'll finish up the whole thing so you can see them at the end, but let me do this. Now you can, of course, smooth any clay. I just find it so much simpler with WED clay because you can soften, firm it up, do some details, soften. You just keep going back and forth until you get the look you want, and it's oh, I don't know, it's such an organic, easy process, and it's almost too easy. And it really, when you're working with a medium, you don't want to fight with it. You don't want to have to struggle to get it to do what you want. And so being able to change the consistency from soft and pliable to hard, and you can do this. I could come in with a spray bottle and soften it all back up, start moving shapes around again. Now, one thing I wanted to be sure and warn you of, since WED clay hardens and cracks, when you bag it at the end of the day, you want to spray it all down real good. And, you know, like if you're going to be working on it the next day or something, or a week later or something. And let me find my bag. Okay, so I got a nice little bag here. Now, you might try to find some good sized bags. This is a gusseted bag we use for product. But you could even use a trash bag, thick or thin, whatever. The key is to make sure it's sealed up. Now, this is a pretty big sculpture, so it kind of barely fits. But we'll have tours and stuff, and sometimes they'll pull the bag off the sculpture, and they don't understand this principle that I'm about to show you. So they think, okay, there, I've covered it. Oh, no, you haven't. And, you know, most of my lessons I've had to learn the hard way. Hopefully, you don't have to do that, but, or watching this video will prevent having to learn it the hard way. But you want to, it's wet, so it will, you know, stick all the way around. So you kind of stick it all the way around and then just snug it up. And then you can take a tool and just stick the tool in, or a nail or anything. And now you've got a tight seal. Because if the bag is just draped over it, air comes up and dries it out. And oh no, you don't want that. So this you'll do whenever you leave the sculpture.
You'll be glad you did.
You know, even if you go to, just you think, I'm going to lunch and I could let it dry a little, and I do that sometimes, but it's slightly risky if it gets forgotten, and then like you remember the day after, oh, I never covered that sculpture up. So it's better to just cover it, because you can always put a fan by it and leave it run for 10 minutes and, you know, it'll dry out quickly. So I think that's pretty much the basics. I'm gonna not bore you with the finishing off the sculpture, but that's why I love WED clay, how you can push it around and work with water and sponges, and it's a wonderful, wonderful medium. But now, in fairness, even though I'm very opinionated about WED clay, there are many, many instances in professional makeup and sculpting where you'd want to use oil-based clay or a wax combination somehow, especially if you know you're going to be working on something for months, or if you've got to feather the edges, things like this. So it's really not fair to act like those aren't relevant, and I have used them and people use these clays. But when it comes to making a big monster, and we've made some big monsters.
Great. So now you've got the big head.
Look who's talking. Or something like this that you've got a lot of a lot of real estate to move around. WED it's hard to beat. And so we are going to put a link under this video below here that you can click on. It'll take you right to a place where you can order it. It's just, you will fall in love with it. Now, you may not have a love affair like I've had with WED clay, but you will fall in love with this clay and use it, and it just makes life easy. And so anyway, thanks for watching, and good luck, and have fun making monsters.